All right, guys, today let's talk about photosynthesis. Okay, so as we always do, let's start out with word roots. Photo means light, and then synthesis means to make. And so then, you know that we always read things backwards, so I'm going to make something from light. The thing I am going to make from light is glucose. So I'm going to make glucose from light energy. And then you have to remember, like, you know, when we talk about glucose, so recall this information that all plants, every plant on this pretty little green earth of ours, all plants and animals, us too, so all plants and animals do cell respiration. All of us have to do cell respiration. Why? Because remember, respiration is making ATP, and ATP fuels, whoops, there's no two L's there, fuels all cell activities. And say plants and animals, we both have a bunch of cells. We're multicellular, we have all the organelles, and so we have a lot of activities to do. So we all have to do cell respiration. It's just how we get, let's go ahead and write down. So it's just how we get the glucose is different. Glucose is different. Because remember, if we're talking about an animal, we eat to get our sugar. And then what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how plants do photosynthesis to get their sugar. But then both of them are going to do respiration, because both of those organisms, animals and plants, need ATP, okay? That is just something we have to remember. All plants and animals do cell respiration. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about what plants need so we can do this process. So what do plants need? What plants need, so let's think about it. If I want to grow a plant, what's the first thing I need to give it? Okay, one of the first things I need to give it is definitely sunlight. Well, that makes sense since I'm going to make something from light energy. What else do we need to give plants to make them live? We need to give them water. And then we also have to make sure they have access to CO2, okay? So these three things right here are the things plants need to live. When we write our equation, they are going to be our reactants, okay? So let's write our equation out. Equation. So I need sunlight, which can also be written as photons. Say a photon is just a packet of sun energy, plus H2O, plus CO2. And then what do plants make? What's the one thing we're trying to make right now? We're trying to make glucose. Okay, that is our goal, is to make glucose. What do plants also give us? They also give us oxygen. So these two things right here, these are products, but more specifically, oxygen is a byproduct because it is something made, but it is not used. All right, so let's talk about where this happens. All right, where? And we've talked about photosynthesis before, at least a little bit. Where does photosynthesis take place? What organelle? It takes place in the chloroplast, okay, in the chloroplast. So let's go ahead and draw what a chloroplast looks like. So it kind of looks like a football. So there you go. Oops, go ahead and close that off. And then we're going to make another line on the inside of it. Look at that. And then we're going to have some disc-looking things in here. Look at that. There you go. Okay, we'll start there. All right, let's talk about what this guy on the very, very outside is. This guy, since it's the outside and we know it's a membrane, it's called the outer membrane. Which means, what is this one on the inside? This is the inner membrane. So we have two membranes. And if you end up taking higher level science classes like AP Bio or something in college, they'll talk about why that's actually a really important thing that they have two membranes. But we're not there today. Okay, so I have that. And then one of these discs, say, I'm just going to highlight one. This one disc, he is called a thylakoid. Okay, thylakoid. So each one of those discs, like this disc and this one, these are all thylakoids. And then when you stack them up together like this, when you have a stack of these discs, this is called a grana. Okay, so thylakoid, one disc, grana is a stack of them. And then we're going to talk about the inside of it. All this inside space right here, this is called the lumen, right? Which, you know, if you've ever bought a flashlight or outside lights, or you've studied something where you have to measure light intensity is measured in lumens, and that's where that name comes from. And then all of this empty space right here, this is called the stroma. Okay, so that's our chloroplast structure. We have the outer membrane, we have the inner membrane. Individual discs are called the thylakoids. When we stack them up, we get grana. Inside each individual thylakoid is a lumen, and then all this empty space on the outside is the stroma. Now, let's talk about why are plants green. So why are plants green? And I think you guys know, say, what's the pigment that plants have that make them green? The pigment that it is, it's chlorophyll. Okay, so chlorophyll is what makes your plants green. What chlorophyll actually is, it's a light absorbing pigment. Okay, it's a light absorbing pigment. And you actually have two different types of chlorophyll. You have chlorophyll A and you have chlorophyll B. Chlorophyll A is what gives us the green color, and B gives us all of our pretty fall colors, like the yellows and the reds and the oranges. And just to recap super quickly, way back from physical science, let's remember why we see colors. So let's write out our rainbow. So here's my Roy G. Biv, right? So if we see green, right? If this is what we see, that means it's being reflected back to us, correct? It's being reflected to us. That's why we see it. Which means all of these other colors, the violets, the indigos, the blues, the yellows, the oranges, and the reds, these are all being absorbed. And if I can absorb that light energy, that means I get to do something with it, all right? That's why we have two different types of chlorophyll. We have the green, because look at all of the stuff that I get to absorb if my chlorophyll reflects green back at me. But then it's like, well, what if I want to use that green energy too? I don't want to be wasteful. And that's why we have chlorophyll B, because chlorophyll B is going to reflect the reds, the oranges, the yellows, but then it's going to absorb the green. That means plants can utilize the entire light spectra and not just some of the waves. Anyway, just wanted to make sure that we were okay with that. Now, let's talk about reactions, all right? Now, photosynthesis, there are two different reactions we're going to look at. The first reaction is called the light reaction. Well, if it's called the light reaction, or it could be called the light dependent reaction, that's because it depends on light, right? That's where the sunlight comes in. And then my second reaction, if the first one's light dependent, then the second one is called light independent reaction, right? Which means it's independent. It doesn't need light at this point. There's also another name. This is also called the Calvin cycle because of the guy that figured out how it worked. Okay? So let's talk about where these reactions take place. All right. The light reaction. The light reaction is going to take place in that thylakoid that we saw, that disc, right? It's the disc-looking guy. It's going to take place there. And what I'm going to need water. And of course, since it's called the light reaction, I'm going to need light here. All right, and then just go ahead and kind of jump the gun, but that way we know what we're looking for. The purpose, right? The purpose of the light reaction is to make ATP, which we should be familiar with, and then I'm going to make this new molecule called NADPH, right? It's kind of another electron donor, an easy way to remember the difference between NADH in cell respiration and NADPH is that P can mean it's in photosynthesis. So NADPH is photosynthesis electron donors, and then NADH is just cell respiration. All right, so let's do the next reaction. So light reaction, I'm in the thylakoid, I need light and water, and the purpose is to make ATP and NADPH. In the Calvin cycle, this is going to happen in the stroma, which remember that was all that empty space. And I'm going to need my other reactant, because I only had 3, so this is going to be CO2. And then the purpose of the Calvin cycle is to do what photosynthesis is set it out to do in the first place, is to make that glucose. Okay? So let's start with the light reaction. Let's go ahead and draw this whole thing out. So light reaction. All right, let's draw it first. This is going to be at a thylakoid membrane. And if it's a membrane, what am I going to draw? I'm going to draw a bunch of phospholipids, all right? So let's start. So we're just going to draw a couple. And you know phospholipids have the bent and the straight tail, but that's not what we're concentrating on today. We have those guys, and then we're going to put this box right here. We're going to talk about him here in a minute. And then there's going to be more. There's going to be more phospholipids because it's a membrane, ... Just pretend that continues on, ... And then we're going to see our old friend right here. Say, this should be fairly familiar. I have a box with lines. And then I have a box that looks like that. Okay? Actually, here, if you want, we can put those squiggles on the other side just so it looks maybe a little bit better. So squiggle, squiggle, there you go. And hopefully that box rings a bell as to what he is. This is our old friend, ATP synthase. So remember, he's the enzyme that's going to make ATP. And then this guy right here, I'm going to highlight him in, whoops, nope, don't do that. Let's highlight him in green. Okay, so this guy right here, he has a special name. His name is a photosystem. Okay, a photosystem. And let's write out to the side, let's just write up here what a photosystem is. Say a photosystem, this is a specialized protein that holds my chlorophyll. And remember, chlorophyll, they're going to absorb light. Okay, so let's talk about locations really fast. This right here, so this membrane, this is my thylakoid membrane. Thylakoid membrane. Up here in this space, this is going to be that stroma. And then the space down here, this is my lumen. So if we go back up to our picture, let's use it in red, like we're looking at this piece right here. So that yellow line, so we can see the stuff on the outside, the white in the middle, and then the yellow line itself is the thylakoid. So we're just looking at this, we're just blowing it up a lot. All right, so let's start this reaction, okay? First, sitting here in the lumen, right? Say your plants are going to take in water, and then this water is going to move all the way to the lumen. So here he's sitting. Now my water, the reason plants need water, right, is because water is a really good electron donor. And we know about that, right? We've talked about electrons. We have really good electron donor. But here's the thing is the water's not going to give it up easily. So he's just sitting there, but he needs another piece. That's where a photon or a package of light comes in. So this package of light, he's going to come in, and he's going to hit this photosystem, which the photosystem, whoops, get rid of that line. This photosystem is full of chlorophyll, okay? So here's my chlorophyll right here, chlorophyll. And so when the sunlight comes in and hits that chlorophyll, that's going to excite this chlorophyll, okay? And when this chlorophyll gets excited, then he's going to be able to take that water and get the electrons. And when you get the electrons, that's going to break it apart. Well, what's H2O made of? So he's going to break apart into hydrogens, and he's also going to break apart into oxygens, right? And that's where the oxygen that we breathe comes from. So this oxygen that was created right here because the sunlight came in, excited the chlorophyll, and broke the water apart, that's how we get to breathe. So now this oxygen, this is going to come out to us. Come out to us, right? This is what enters the atmosphere. So every time you guys breathe in oxygen, which is since the day you're born till the day you die, that oxygen was made because water was broken up by sunlight, okay? And so now you guys understand, like this thylakoid membrane, this acts a lot like an electron transport chain, right? Say this is very similar to the ETC. So what happened when I had those electrons, right? Well, when I had those electrons, that's going to make this ATP synthase spin. I know it's backwards from last time, but that's all right. So I have these electrons. Now that I have the electrons, ATP synthase spins. And when ATP synthase spins, that means I get to take my substrates, as I've done before. Here's my ADP. Here's my phosphate. They both go sit inside the active site. And then when they sit inside the active site and ATP synthase spins, that means I get ATP, okay? But, not really but and, I suppose. So I just made ATP, which is really, really good. I also need to make NADPH. And so what NADPH will do, part of him is sitting out here. Sorry, it's getting a little crowded up here. So here's my NADP. And then sometimes, because remember, he's a good electron, well, he's a good electron donor, but he's also going to take some electrons. So then he's going to take the electrons out of this photosystem. He's going to grab a hydrogen, and then I'm going to make the NADPH. Okay? So let's write some words out to the side really, really fast, all right? So water's sitting here in my thylakoid membrane. So water is going to donate an electron to the chlorophyll, right? And then when water donates the electron to the chlorophyll, that's going to make the ATP synthase. ATP synthase spin. All right, so let's just kind of follow it with this nice little white line. Here's my water sitting right here. He's happy. But then when the light comes in and hits that chlorophyll gets excited and he breaks the water apart, and that's where the electron comes in. When water gets broken apart, I get some hydrogens, and then that oxygen comes out to us. That's why we get to breathe. And now that I have those electrons are going to make the ATP synthase spin, which is going to give me the ATP. And then the NADPH will take that electron out, right? So my NADP will take the electron out to make NADPH. That means I get to break more water up, I get to excite it again, I get to make ATP synthase spin. Otherwise, this would be a one and done reaction. I'd get to break one water molecule, I'd get to spin ATP synthase once, and then my reaction would be over. But if I have the light hit the chlorophyll and I get the electron, then that NADPH can take that electron out and I can do the reaction over and over and over again. Because my entire goal for the light reaction was to make ATP and NADPH, which is what I just made, okay? And so then I get to go on to my next reaction. Let's make my next reaction this nice purple. So this is my next reaction. This is going to be the Calvin cycle. Calvin cycle, or the light independent reaction, whichever you want to call it. So we're going to start with a new friend today. We haven't seen this guy yet. This is going to be an enzyme named Rubisco. Rubisco. That's a CO. Rubisco. And he's going to look kind of like this. There you go. We'll make it look like an enzyme like we used to do. Now, the only funny thing about this enzyme is that it doesn't end in ACE. So it's one of the tricky enzymes. So Rubisco's an enzyme, and he looks like that. And so now I just need to do the next set of reactions, right? You guys can see if this is my enzyme right here. This is my enzyme, Rubisco. I have these two active sites, okay? Two active sites. And so then I get to find my substrates, right? So my first substrate is the other part of the equation. It's my CO2. So here's my CO2 substrate. So CO2, this is going to enter from the atmosphere, right? So from the atmosphere, and then here comes CO2, right? And he's one of my substrates. And then also sitting over here is another substrate. His name is RuBP, and we're not really concerned about what RuBP stands for or anything else other than the fact that, guess what? RuBP is a 5-carbon molecule. And if I look back over here, how many carbons does CO2 have? 1. So I'm going to take both of these substrates, I'm going to put them in this enzyme, right? But think about ATP synthase, he only spins when I have electrons. Well, this guy is only going to spin because of this ATP and this NADPH, right? These guys are going to come over here to this enzyme because I just made them. They're going to come over here and they are going to help power, whoops, went to an eraser. They're going to help power this enzyme, all right? So I made these two in the light reactions because I need them to help power the enzyme over here. So the CO2 and the RuBP, they're going to come into this enzyme and then they're going to be forced together because of the ATP and the NADPH. Well, let's count carbons, yeah? I have 1 carbon over here with CO2. I have 5 carbons over here. If I force them together, how many carbons do I have? What's 1 plus 5? I get a 6-carbon molecule. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, you know what? If I have 6 carbons, what is the thing I'm trying to make? It is glucose, which is C6H12 CO6. So I just made glucose in the Calvin cycle, which is the overall goal. The goal of the Calvin cycle is to make glucose. And I just did that by using this CO2 and by using this other molecule called Ruby P, which is a 5-carbon sugar. All right, so light reactions. Water sits here. Once the water sits here, the light comes in, excites the electrons, he breaks water apart, he donates an electron. That electron is going to help ATP synthase spin. But now all of his energy is gone. So the NADP pulls the electron out and makes the NADPH. So that means I can have water and the light hit it again, so I can keep doing this reaction over and over and over. Because water broke apart, I got oxygen coming out to us. And because I had those electrons, I get to make my ATP. So in the light reaction, I made NADPH and ATP. I'm going to use both of those, right here. I'm going to use both of those to power this enzyme right here, because this enzyme is going to take in the CO2, he's going to take in the Ruby P, force them together. I get a 6-carbon molecule, that's my glucose. And now that I have my glucose right here, then this glucose is going to be moved to the mitochondria to do cell respiration. And then what's my goal for doing cell respiration? So I can make large amounts of ATP. Because remember, plants have to do photosynthesis and respiration. Animals have to eat and then do cell respiration. Okay, so photosynthesis. I'm making something from light. The thing I'm making is glucose, right? All things have to do cell respiration. So photosynthesis is how plants get their sugar so they can do cell respiration. I need sunlight and water and CO2. I'm going to make glucose, which is what I want, and then oxygen is a byproduct. This all happens in the chloroplast. I have the thylakoids. I have a stack of them called a grana. I have the lumen on the inside, and then the rest of this space out here is called my stroma. Chlorophyll is very important because it is a light-absorbing pigment, and I can use that light-absorbing pigment to break apart water so I can get electrons. The two reactions are the light reactions and the Calvin cycle. The light reactions need sunlight right here, so that way it can break apart the water. That way I can get the excited electron to make the ATP synthase spin so I can make ATP. NADP pulls out that used electron to make NADPH so I can do that whole process. Then I can use the ATP and the NADPH to make this enzyme work, so I can take in the CO2 and the Ruby P and make my final product, which is that sugar, so I can send it to cell respiration. Okay, I hope that helps.